Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about Here There Be Monsters by Andy Lynn. As you can see, I've got the CD cover here by Big Finish, and over here, like always, I've got my own DVD cover, which I designed myself. I got a head poking out, which I think is really cool. And normally when I make these DVDs, the colours are a bit fadey, but I don't know if it comes well on the screen, but I actually prefer the colouring on this one, on the DVD in this time. I don't know, something about the way the fadiness shows more of her face. Also, her eyes are pretty scary in that one. So, Andy Lynn is a Doctor Who writer who's done a few audio dramas and he's done a few Seventh Doctor stories. He's mostly known for his Seventh Doctor stories, but this is the only one I own of his. So this is my only exposure to Andy Lynn. Now this story is very interesting in its setup. Now this is a companion chronicles, which means it's told as a storybook through the eyes of a companion after they've left the Doctor, and they're like talking about like a story. This story is actually Carol Ann Ford's first time working for Big Finish. This was her first audio story, which is kind of funny because in our chronological ordering, this is her last. However, this one does something a bit different. You see, she's talking about her life after the Doctor in the present day, when she's talking about like her husband, and she's kind of like telling this story to someone. However, there's a character in this who is still talking to her, and she's like, "You can't be here. I can't be hearing you because you're dead." And then that like angles us into the actual plot with the Doctor and Ian and Susan and Barbara. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I like what they do with this concept. But for the actual story itself, in this story, the Doctor, Ian, Susan and Barbara, they go onto a ship full of plants. And these plants seem to be moving on their own, and there's vines that can control the ship. It's moving all the buttons and stuff. And they meet this being, this giant plant being who controls the ship, and it's just this one member of the crew, the captain of the crew. I can't remember the name. The plant thing is called rostrum, and rostrum, what it does is it's because it's a ship that sets like flags. It's the best way I can describe it, like flags for future ships, so they know where they are and they can map out space easier. However, these flags take the form of ripping a hole in space, which is what dragged the TARDIS onto the ship. And what we get here is just a bunch of dialogue. If you love your characters just talking and explaining away everything, you're gonna love this story. There's a whole argument between Rostrum, who doesn't see the problem in this and is just making tags onto where ships can know where they are from Earth in space, and the Doctor, who thinks tearing a space is just terrible and it could leave this universe to dangers such as like a parallel, like another dimension. And the argument is sort of a bit dull. I'm not a huge fan of Rostrum and the Doctor as debating this story. It's very bland, very boring. Obviously, the Doctor has got this whole dangerous thing, like this whole what's the word? Like, he knows that this is a terrible tragedy and it will destroy everything if it's allowed to continue. But something about the dialogue here and just how Rostrum is just such a dull character, it doesn't really work. You don't really get the tension of what this is. But I like the concept though, that there's this whole other dimension, that these cracks in space are allowing us to be vulnerable to. It's a very good idea, and it's something that Big Finish does a lot of times, but I just don't think, in terms of it, in the plot, it doesn't work. And that takes up most of the story, but during these times, Susan goes wandering the ship, and she's talking to herself in the modern time narrative of it, that she feels like she needs to be making her own decisions. She doesn't always have to depend on the doctor all the time, and you can start to feel that her era is coming to an end. Soon she is going to have to leave the doctor, because, as she explained, she's kind of holding him back a little bit. She thinks that the doctor left the home planet, because he wanted to explore the universe. But looking after Susan and always have to save her, she's basically hindering his travelling experience. Maybe that's not the case, but that's how she feels, and it's very interesting to get that point from her. And it is here that she meets the first mate, a character who appears to be working on the ship as a sort of like a sort of crew member, fixing up things. And when Susan's talking to this guy, she realizes that the leaves around him are dying, and she starts feeling sick. And their discussions are very interesting. He's the guy who she's talking to, and you can hear that he was the dead guy from before, which kicked off this story. And I think these dialogues are actually pretty handled. They're a bit sci-fi. There's a lot of bits where he's just explaining like how the ship works and how these engines and what they do, which does get pretty dull. But when it gets to Susan and him just talking about their characters, it really works. And I also like how it kind of blends on whether they're talking in the story or whether they're talking now as the narrators. It sort of gels, and you don't really know when you're listening to it which version are you listening to. Is that them talking then, or is that them talking now? Even at some points, Susan actually turns around and asks him, "Is that what you said then, or is that what you're saying now?" And he's like, "I don't know, does it matter?" So, brilliant. The first mate is played by Stephen Hancock. He does a very great job here. I don't know much about him. Maybe I should have looked that up before doing this discussion. But he's a very great actor. He gets a very old, wise man kind of feel to him. You could tell just by his voice that he's been around the block a few times. So I thought the first mate was pretty interesting. However, Susan then goes back to the crew, and we get back to our boring, lovable dialogue. Hooray! And literally, I can't stress this enough, the dialogue just doesn't change. They go around a circle, basically, of how everything is terrible in the situation. There's no growth in this danger, in this surrounding. So it's a very dull listen to. I think the main problem with it as well is Rustrum, who is the plant creature is very robotic size, and it even gets to a point where Barbara asks it is it bored about life, and it basically is like, I am a plant, we are made to be born and stuff, which I think was a pretty cool segment. But then because of that, the entire rest of the conversation is boring, because it's just like, why is the doctor just not talking to a computer, and you're just listening to the doctor banter with a computer for basically 50 minutes. So it's a bit on the weak side. And it seems like time has become a loop, because Susan then goes wandering again. And it's just explained as if she's just gone back and she got bored, so she decides to walk off again. Hooray! and she goes to meet the first mate again. But this time she is kind of like, hold on, you shouldn't be here. Does the other people know, does this plant Ruthrum person know that you are even on the ship? Are you a stowaway? And the dialogue sort of blends even more here. You don't really know when Susan's talking or when the first mate is talking in terms of their time period. So that's really cool. Again, the dialogue does kind of give you dumps of dialogue of how the ship works, which is not very interesting. They explain how the ship is able to make these holes in space. And Susan is like, this captain has got only needed one of these things for its mission to work. So why does it have 7, or was it 8? I can't remember. But why does it have more than one? And there's this literally, it's just like a speech long dialogue on how the whole thing operates, and it's very dull, very uninteresting. I might even go as far as to say this is the weakest story we have so far in our marathon, which I'm very sad to say, because there are a lot of good moments, especially how Susan really feels like she needs to become more independent on the Doctor. Like when she says she should go back to talk to the Doctor and see what's happening with them. And the first mate is like, do you always follow your grandfather around? Can't you do anything by yourself? Which I think was a bit mean-spirited, but it really works for Susan's character. And when it does these little bits of character development for Susan, it is really good. You really feel like this is an important story in Susan's character arc. It's just a shame that it's just covered with just dialogue of meaningless sci-fi gibberish. So that's a shame. And then Susan then faints because she gets feeling so ill, and Barbara calls onto her. And you think, right, we're going to finally pick up something now because, if Susan fainted, we're going to get a bit of the action's going to start kicking in-ish. What happens then? Susan and Barbara then go back to the captain's room, and the Doctor and Ruthrum are bantering again about the whole don't make holes in space, you bloody idiot. No, I think I'm just gonna continue because my work is important. Don't do that, you bloody moron. Why? Just imagine that for most of the story, and you've got your first episode anyway. Oh, I forgot to mention this is 2 parts. But anyway, just before the cliffhanger of part 1, we get a communication from another ship, and they get sent missiles, and they start tackling down our ship. Hooray! Something interesting happens. Hooray! And it gets even more interesting in part 2 and how it's resolved, because this thing that the way it's explained is absolutely gorgeous. Like Susan described, Caroline Ford's reading of it. It's like this thing opened up, and through it you can see eternity. And it was like seeing colours that have never been dreamt of before. It was like seeing a crazed rainbow. Stuff like that. And it was just gorgeous, and I absolutely loved this description. And what happens then is this thing, this light, this thing of tentacles, and really seemed like H.P. Lovecraft kind of creature, the way it's described. Actually sends the missiles back to this attacking ship, and then it disappears, and then Ian is like, what the hell was that? And then it's just like, then Doctor explains that this is actually one of the creatures from the other side of the rapture of space, and it's coming out, and it's all these monsters that are coming out to try and conquer our universe, basically. And that whilst this is happening, Ruthrum gets a communication from the attacking ship, and when it explains that their captain of that ship explains that this ship actually wasn't given permission to do any of these space rapture, and it's actually like tearing down some of the planets that it's going past, and it was like you're not really welcomed here because you're messing everything up. So we're gonna send these missiles at you, and then they've come back and they're gonna destroy us. So that bit got really interesting. There's a little debate about how the Ruthrum didn't get any permission to do any of these stuff, and it's like what you're doing all this progress and stuff, but you didn't even consider what other people was even think about. Did you even ask their permission before you dumped this stuff at their back door? That was really good. But then we go back to our boring dialogue from part 1. Yay! Oh boy, I love this. Barbara then asks, like, you need to sort your crew better because this guy that Susan was talking to just left her there when she fainted. And the Ruthrum is like, there is no other members of this crew. You are strangers. I thought you were the only ones. And then it's like, ooh, that's interesting, this weird stowaway. I mean, we already know that he wasn't all what he seems, but it started picking up story-wise. So the Doctor and the crew start looking around the ship to see if this guy, who the hell this guy is. And then Susan bumps into him again and they have a chat, and like I said, and because now we're actually getting into the thicker parts of the story, all that sci-fi junk is put aside to us, and now we're getting some really great dialogue. And there's this whole bit where she's talking to him and she's like, it's kind of familiar. And this guy then also explains that Susan's getting ill because he's kind of accidentally, not on purpose, absorbing her energy, and if she stays there long enough, she will die. And I love this bit because Susan just stands up to him and is like, you are coming back with me and we're gonna interrogate you. Oh, I'll stand here and keep by you until I shovel up like these dead plants around us. That was a really cool moment, and I was like, yes, that was so cool. Well done, Susan. Well done, Carol Ann Ford. Well done, Andy Lynn. That was a really cool scene. And then what happens then is that Ian and the Doctor jump this guy, and then the Doctor and Susan have a little chat about their characters, and it's like you are starting to grow up. And I think Susan says something about how she can see in the Doctor's eyes that she is growing up, but she isn't sure that he is quite happy about it. I thought that was a very cute and sweet line. Very sums up their relationship. I've also noticed as well, just now talking about it, is that I don't talk about Ian and Barbara that much in the story. They sort of blend into the background. I mean, they have to be here because this takes place later on in Susan's storyline, so they kind of have to be here. You can't really set this story pre-Unearthly Child, but they are kind of blended in the background, which I don't really mind when the actors are not in it. Like, if William Russell was here and then they still put them into the sidelines, I would be more disappointed, but I don't mind it here. It's just a shame that what they do replace it with is mostly gibberish. But then the Doctor says to Susan, the Doctor then is going to interrogate this guy, and Susan asks, can she come along? She feels that even though he's maybe a villain, that he's deep down a very nice guy and he doesn't really have any bad motivations. So the Doctor's like, maybe you're right. Maybe we should talk to him together. But if you feel ill, we will go back. Now here's a great, interesting line. Susan says, like, what if you get ill? But then the doctor's like, well, it won't affect me that much because we both know that I am different. So it kind of implies that Susan and the doctor might not be the same race. That's something interesting. I don't think a lot of people have talked about that. There's a fan theory. In my personal opinion, it's a terrible fan theory, but there is a fan theory. If you like it, then it's your own theory. But I don't personally like it. That Susan isn't actually the doctor's granddaughter. It's a bit of a popular fan theory. I don't really like it. I think I prefer it that they have this loving family bond, and that the Susan is his granddaughter. But you know, it's neither here or there. They interrogate this guy, and he explains that he is from the other side of space, and his civilization are actually trying to fix the holes that the ship from our dimension is breaking. And the Doctor's fascinated how there are not only civilizations but actually decent people on the other side. He believed that they were all just hideous monsters, which this is where we get the title Here There Be Monsters. And I like the bond the Doctor and this guy have. After the Doctor's been talking to Ruth Drum, this was a nice refreshing pace. So the story does get picked up a lot during this part. And Susan watching them two talk, she says that, like, they're both very similar. They're both old men, they're both wise, they're both like loving grandfather figures. However, this guy seems a bit more innocent, I think is the word, whilst the Doctor's a bit more grumpy. I really like that bit. I really like that she looked at them and she put it in her head, like, maybe there's like a connection between them. Yeah. And this guy, he explains that he is kind of like the opposite of our TARDIS crew, and because he's on our dimension, he's kind of absorbing all life around him. And he also says that if they were in his universe, it will probably be the same way, like they would absorb his people's energy. So that was kind of fascinating. Still just sci-fi mumbo, but it's interesting sci-fi mumbo. It doesn't stick on the same points over and over again like before, so it is picking up a bit. And the plant creature believes that this is the Doctor's crew trying to like sabotage its mission, because obviously the Doctor rejected its mission, so it tries to kill our TARDIS crew. And there's this whole thing where the Doctor, he could save everyone, but he has to risk the TARDIS, and he doesn't really want to do that. So this guy, he says, when the form he's in, it's not actually his form, he's this human form that he's taken. It's not actually his form. The form he actually is would not only be unimaginable and probably make them all mad just by looking at it. It'll probably make the process of absorbing life around it quicker. And so what he does is he transforms, but very slowly, just enough so the plants could die, but just enough so the Doctor and his crew can get into the TARDIS. And then we get like a big action scene, and then we get the ending to our story. And then the Susan and this guy at the end of the story are just having like a small one chat about like, is it really there? I was like, I remember when this happened to you, and it's like, are you here now, or am I just remembering you from the past? And the guy is like, does it matter? And I just loved, it felt very H.P. Lovecraft. That's the best way I can describe it. Very like it's beyond your imagination. So that's Here There Be Monsters. I felt this story had a lot of potential. Has a very lot of mystery and out of atmosphere. However, especially in part 1, it felt really long. Like, I thought I was coming up to part 4 until I remembered it's only one disc and it's only 2 parts. Normally when it's 4 parters, they put 2 on 2 discs. So, yeah, don't really recommend it, to be honest, unless those bits that sound interesting feel like your kind of thing, then I think go for it. But if you're an average Who listener, maybe this one is a pass. So there you go, my first sort of negative review. Oh, hooray. And there you go, that's the last first Doctor audio I personally own. So from now on, we're going to go from the TV for a while. So join us next time where the Doctor and the crew get back to 1963 Earth. But everything seems a little bit bigger when they get back. I'll see you next time for the Planet of Giants. I'll see you all next time on the Doctor Who Marathon.